Hey everyone, I'm Joe. Welcome back to Sip and Talk. Today, we are really digging into a major development, something coming out of the U.S. legal system that has, well, huge implications for international trade and tariffs.
That's right. It's a big one. And we've got a pretty good stack of sources here. There's a detailed report on the court ruling itself, analyses of market reactions, how it's hitting China, and, different takes on U.S. trade policy, even touching on companies like NVIDIA. Okay, so our mission today, for you listening, is to really unpack this. It's complex, legally and economically. We want to pull out the key nuggets so you can get a handle on what's happening right now and what might happen down the road. Sounds good. Let's start with the main event then. The big news is this ruling from the U.S. Court of International Trade.
Yeah, and it wasn't like a close call or anything, was it?
No, not at all. The sources emphasize it was unanimous. 3 judges all agreed. And the headline, they basically found that the vast majority, I think the phrase was sacha, of tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, are illegal.
Illegal. Okay. And these were tariffs applied pretty broadly.
Yeah, exactly. Against global imports, Mexico, Canada, and significantly China, all justified using that IEPA authority, which lets the president act in certain, declared emergencies.
And the court gave a deadline for action.
They did. The order reportedly says these specific tariffs have to be canceled within just 10 days.
Wow, 10 days. That's quick. So let's peel back the layers. Why? Why did the court say these were illegal? What's the legal thinking here?
Well, based on the sources, it really boils down to how they interpret the IEPA law itself. The core idea is that to use these emergency powers, the president needs to point to an exceptional and unusual threat.
And the court looked at the reasons given and didn't think they fit that definition.
Pretty much. They looked at things like, long-term trade deficits, ongoing smuggling issues, and the court basically said, look, these might be problems, but they don't qualify as a sudden emergency threat, CISR, under the specific way this trade law is written. That's their area of expertise, trade law.
So it's like saying, these issues exist, sure, but they aren't the kind of emergency that lets you use this specific power to slap on tariffs.
That's a really good way to put it, yeah. And they also brought up proportionality. The court said, even if you could argue there was an emergency, the response has to be proportionate and closely related, meaning these huge comprehensive tariffs and imposing so much at once, that was just too much. It was an overreach, not proportionate to the threats cited, even if they were valid.
So the tool was just too big for the job described under this law.
That's the sense you get. The court was clear. IEPA isn't a CUSA blank check for the president to impose tariffs whenever. They also sort of nodded to the Constitution, reminding everyone that setting tariffs is usually Congress's job.
Did they mention other laws already on the books?
They did. Sources say they pointed to things like the 1974 Trade Act. That law already has ways to deal with trade issues, even allowing tariffs up to 15% over 150 days in some cases. The court's logic seemed to be, well, if the president can just declare an emergency and impose huge tariffs anytime, what's the point of these other more detailed laws? They'd be meaningless.
Okay, so a clear ruling from this court. Illegal based on IEPA's specific requirements and proportionality. But what happens now? Does the administration just say, okay, and cancel them?
Doesn't sound like it. The sources report the Trump administration indicated right there on the spot that they intend to appeal.
Okay, not a huge surprise perhaps. So where does the appeal go?
First stop is the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. But honestly, given the stakes here, everyone seems to expect this could go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Right. And that's where it gets really crucial for you, our listeners. Why does this legal fight, potentially heading to the highest court, actually matter day to day?
Well, it just throws a whole lot more uncertainty and, frankly, potential volatility into the whole trade picture. Appeals take time, the final outcome. Nobody knows for sure right now. That makes planning tough for businesses.
And there's a big chunk of money involved too, isn't there?
A huge chunk. If this ruling holds up after appeals, the sources estimate that cumulative tariffs may be up to $21 billion, 210
yeah.
might have to be refunded to the companies that paid them.
$21 billion. That's massive.
It really is. That could be a significant injection back into the economy if it happens.
Okay, so this ruling is clearly a big deal. But we need to be careful. It doesn't mean all tariffs are gone, right? That's a really important distinction the sources make.
Absolutely critical point, yes. This ruling is aimed squarely at those Wu programmatic tariffs, the ones specifically justified using that IEEPA emergency declaration. Things like retaliatory tariffs or ones linked to immigration or fentanyl flows that were brought in under that specific emergency power.
So what tariffs were not affected by this decision?
Okay, so tariffs or investigations under other laws are still in place. That includes Section 232 actions. Those are the ones based on national security. Think steel, aluminum, critical minerals, semiconductors, pharma, aerospace. Those tariffs aren't touched by this.
Okay.
And it also doesn't negate Section 301 tariffs or investigations. Those target unfair trade practices, the big ones on many Chinese goods, fall under that. They remain active.
That's a crucial clarification. It's not a blanket repeal. It's specific to the IEPA justification.
Precisely. Now, zooming out a bit, the sources also touch on how people view the Trump administration's overall strategy with tariffs. There are different perspectives presented.
Right. Let's walk through those, just laying out what the sources say. How has that strategy been seen?
Well, one view is that the tariffs were basically bargaining chips.
Huh?
Legitimate leverage for negotiations with other countries.
And there was a historical comparison mentioned. Nixon, maybe?
Yeah, they bring up Nixon using the Trading with the Enemy Act back in '71 for an import surcharge. Back then, the court basically deferred to the president on defining an emergency. But the sources caution that it's tricky to apply that precedent today because the laws and the whole situation are pretty different.
And the separation of powers angle. That seems really relevant here.
Definitely. The idea that the courts, especially the Supreme Court, act as a check on the president and Congress. The sources mention that conservative justices, in particular, might be wary of executive or legislative overreach versus, whether it was foolish or calculated. This ruling really highlights that judicial review function, interpreting the limits of IEPA.
It really shows that push and pull in the system. So some saw the strategy as maybe chaotic, others as very deliberate.
Exactly. Those contrasting views are out there. Foolish, no clear plan, versus calculating, everything thought out.
And then there's a really interesting perspective from Jensen Huang at NVIDIA included in the sources.
Yes, he's quoted. He apparently expressed trust in Trump's vision and plan. He highlighted two ideas he found Kahu, incredible, and Suyu, extremely visionary.
Which two?
First, using tariffs as a key part of driving reindustrialization, bringing manufacturing back. And second, the idea of repealing rules on AI diffusion to help spread U.S. tech globally, creating an American tech stack. It's presented as his viewpoint from the source material.
That's quite a take, especially coming from a tech leader like Huang. Okay, let's shift gears. What happened right after the ruling came out? How did the markets react?
Well, the immediate reaction reported was pretty strong, actually. U.S. and European stock futures jumped significantly.
So a sense of relief, maybe?
Yeah, described as a sigh of relief. The interpretation was that without these specific tariffs, U.S. economic growth prospects, they look better.
Any currency movements?
The U.S. dollar reportedly got stronger, while the euro and the Chinese renminbi weakened a bit.
And you mentioned NVIDIA earlier. Their stock reacted too.
It did. Reportedly jumped over 5% in after-hours trading. And stocks of companies that supply NVIDIA apparently saw a boost too.
But there's always a but, isn't there? Sources included some caution.
Always. Yes, some analysts quoted felt the market might have overreacted because of the planned appeal. That appeal creates uncertainty, so they were suggesting cat volatility could stick around.
And they mentioned a specific trading term, the taco trade. What's that about?
Yeah, it's mentioned. It apparently refers to this phenomenon where traders anticipate that tariff hikes will eventually get rolled back or delayed. So when news like this ruling breaks, some see it as a quick buy-the-dip opportunity, betting on that pattern.
Interesting. So despite the legal clouds ahead, the initial market vibe was positive.
Yeah, that optimism seemed to carry into the market open, even knowing the appeal was coming.
Okay, let's widen the lens again. How are these U.S. policy shifts, tariffs included, impacting China? What do the sources say there?
It's quite interesting. One point raised is that U.S. policies might actually be pushing Chinese customers away from U.S. tech faster. They're finding it difficult to rely on U.S. tech, and that's reportedly driving them towards alternatives like Huawei's tech stack.
So, an unintended consequence. Trying to restrict them actually speeds up their domestic development.
That seems to be the argument presented. For example, restricting sales of chip design software. That might just stimulate them to adopt and develop their own tools even faster.
And there are specific export bans mentioned.
Yes, reports of halting exports of aerospace stuff engines, parts, and semiconductor tech, specifically that chip design software, to China.
Why these specific restrictions, according to the sources?
The reasons mentioned are things like putting pressure on China, maybe responding to China's own limits on exporting certain minerals. But the impact, reportedly severe for China's SU, their domestic large aircraft project, and their overall chip design capability.
It's not just about hardware and software, though, is it? There's a human element, too.
Right. The sources talk about the U.S. withdrawing some visas for Chinese students, especially if they have government ties or are studying in use-critical fields. It's seen partly as trying to prevent spying or ensure loyalty, but the potential downside noted is it could shrink the foreign talent pool for U.S. tech companies, maybe even NVIDIA.
And shipbuilding, that seemed like a specific hit.
Yeah, that stood out. Apparently, new orders for Chinese shipyards took a significant hit because of worries the U.S. might impose port fees on ships built there. So orders started shifting to South Korea and Japan.
A direct economic hit from trade policy fears.
Seems like it. And it apparently led to this weird situation, a tacit strategy where Chinese yards and owners might be slowing down construction. Why? Because ships built there that might face U.S. restrictions are apparently being sold at a discount. Nobody wants a ship they can't easily send to the U.S.
Wow. Okay, let's bring it back to NVIDIA. We talked about the market reaction, but how are they actually dealing with this whole complex picture, especially the China restrictions?
While the sources acknowledge it's a hit, they estimate NVIDIA's lost revenue opportunity in China is around $8 billion a year.
$8 billion. That's substantial. How do they make up for that?
The big driver, according to the sources, is just the massive boom in demand for AI inferencing. That's where the trained AI models actually do the work, make predictions, generate text or images. Demand is exceptionally high.
So the overall AI wave is just that powerful.
It seems so. That's described as the main offset. Plus, their new Grace Blackwell architecture, it's being called a home run. It's specifically designed for these AI thinking machines and inferencing systems. The timing was apparently perfect, hitting right as AI inference really took off.
And their supply chain is holding up.
Reports say it's expanding and doing very well.
So, incredible demand, a hot new product line timed perfectly, and a solid supply chain are helping to plug that $8 billion hole from China.
That's the picture painted by the sources, yes. The extra demand and supply from Grace Blackwell are really helping compensate.
But Huang still stresses China's importance, despite the current issues.
He does. He's quoted pointing out it's the world's second biggest AI market and has the largest group of AI researchers. It's not just about today's sales, it's about the future, the talent.
You mentioned Huawei's tech stack becoming more attractive. How does NVIDIA view that competition, according to the sources?
Huang acknowledges Huawei has Winshan and Serong, rapidly developed and significantly improved capabilities just in the past year. He apparently said their capability seems to be doubling or quadrupling yearly, and they're shipping a lot more volume.
Wow. How does their tech compare, in NVIDIA's view?
Well, the assessment reported is that Huawei's tech might now be comparable to NVIDIA's own H200 chip. And potentially, Huawei might even offer a larger system matrix, which is important for big AI models, than NVIDIA's latest. Huang calls Huawei formidable and says they're definitely not standing still.
So, with China still important and Huawei advancing, is NVIDIA trying to design specific chips for China that meet U.S. rules?
They're reportedly considering it new architectures, new chips, but the sources stress the U.S. restrictions are all very strict. The H20 chip they can sell there is apparently already the minimum spec for their Hopper architecture. So designing something less powerful that's still useful and compliant, it's tough.
What's the guiding principle then?
Huang's quoted saying, basically, whatever they offer in China has to be competitive. It has to add real value for the customers there.
But despite these headwinds, NVIDIA still feels good about competing globally.
Yeah, Huang expresses confidence. He believes the U.S. has the smartest computer scientists. U.S. companies are very competitive. They feel they can win.
And they're obviously not just focusing on China. They're expanding elsewhere.
Exactly. To offset those China losses, they're actively growing in Europe, the Middle East, India, other parts of Asia.
And Huang's travel plans reflect that.
Seems so. He apparently plans to visit European leaders. He makes the point that countries everywhere now see AI as use of national infrastructure, like electricity or the internet. They all want their own AI capabilities. And there's a lot of talk about Huzhou AI factory projects. And just a couple of other quick related points from the sources.
Go for it.
One was about Elon Musk. He's apparently ended his formal advisory role with the Trump administration, described as a friendly breakup despite some recent static, like Musk criticizing the tax bill. The source suggests maybe he just needs to focus on his own companies, Tesla, SpaceX, X, all facing challenges.
Interesting timing there.
And the other thing was just tying back to the money. Those tariffs the court struck down, they represented a lot of the total U.S. tariff revenue. So if they stay canceled, it could make funding things like tax plans more challenging, potentially.
Right, connects trade policy right back to the budget. Okay, that was a lot. But really fascinating how interconnected all this is.
It really is. I mean, we started with this big legal decision, the court saying, hold on, based on specific interpretations of emergency powers and proportionality.
Then the immediate appeal, creating all this uncertainty, plus the possibility of billions in refunds hanging in the balance.
And clarifying it doesn't kill all tariffs, just the ones under that specific IEPA justification. Section 232, 301, those are separate tracks.
We touched on the different ways people view the whole tariff strategy bargaining chip, historical context, separation of powers, even Huang's visionary take.
Plus the market's initial phew reaction, tempered by the reality of the appeal and potential volatility. NVIDIA's stock jump being a prime example.
And then the ripple effects in China, maybe pushing them faster on tech, hitting specific industries like aerospace and shipbuilding, the visa issues.
And finally, how a company like NVIDIA navigates it all, leveraging the massive AI boom, their new tech, strong supply chain, while acknowledging the China challenge and expanding elsewhere, seeing AI as this global infrastructure race.
Yeah, what really stands out is just how many layers there are. It's not just tariffs good or tariffs bad, legal or illegal. It's about the U.S. system's checks and balances. It's about global economic reactions, industry shifts. It's complex.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Especially listening to the court's reasoning about exceptional and unusual threats and proportionality. What does that mean today? In a world this connected, who gets to draw that line? That's something for you listening to really chew on.
And maybe how these legal battles, wherever they end up, might change the rule book, change the tools any future administration has when they face tough international economic choices. Definitely a lot to consider.